Hello and welcome to Who's the Bossk? It's a Star Wars podcast from laughingplace.com. My name is Mike Celestino. I am your host. I am the lead Southern California reporter and editorial director for Star Wars content at Laughing Place. This is episode number 164 of Who's the Bossk, and it's kind of one of these impromptu episodes where we're kind of responding to something news that broke today. And specifically, that news is the passing of the performer, the writer, the actor, the comedian, Paul Reubens. And for that conversation, I have invited on the show for the first time, actually, which is kind of shocking, my friend and fellow Pee Wee Herman fanatic, Curt Sandvig. Curt, thank you so much for coming on the show at the last minute to talk about this guy who we both really admire.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. This is going to be a tough one for me. I'll admit it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just start off here by asking you, like, what was where were you when you heard the news? What was your initial reaction this morning?
So I always have I was at work. I work from home. I have my computer up, and I always have my home laptop up as well. And I got an alert from his Instagram because I have it, flagged. So I got an alert and I was like, that's weird. He never does anything in the morning. So I clicked on it, read the news, and immediately thought, this can't be true. This is fake. And I contacted a buddy of mine. His name is Chris Haston. And because he's friends with Paul. And I said, please tell me this isn't true. And he said, check IMDb. I haven't heard anything. I'm not calling Paul this morning because I'm sure a million people are calling him over this fake news. And then immediately texted me back. It was true.
Yeah, it did seem fake. And I was also working when the news broke, and a coworker alerted us in our Slack chat. And it just, I mean, it must have been kind of what it was like when you heard Andy Kaufman passed away.
Yeah,
I mean, I
exactly.
wasn't old enough at that point to register even who he was, but he just, I mean, Paul Reubens always seemed so young at heart, even though he was 70 years old at this point. It did come across kind of like fake news that was hard to process at first, and then once it did finally hit me, it was like a gut punch. Like,
Oh yeah, no,
oh
I'll
well,
admit it. I cried all morning. It was
yeah,
unbelievable. It really was.
yeah, totally agreed. It took me a little while to even like get back to work. Like,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was, I want to say like an hour where I was just kind of processing it. And that's why I kind of called this emergency meeting of the Midnight Society. No, that's not what this is. This is Who's the Bossk podcast. And I thought, who better to kind of talk this out, than you, Curt, because I knew you were a big fan like me. So thank
yeah.
you again. But before we get into talking about Paul Reubens and all about his life and career, I want to ask you, Curt, since you haven't been on the show before, I want to ask you a little bit about what you're up to now. I know you had or have a entertainment news kind of website as well called Holly Wookie. What's the history of that? How did that get started, and is that still going?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's not still going. I'll get to that in a second. The history of it is I've always wanted to do like red carpet, but I wanted to do red carpet not from asking the same regular questions that everybody asks. I wanted to do it from a nerd's perspective.
Okay.
So I created a website called hollywookie.com, a nerd's guide to Hollywood. And it was received really well. I was really lucky. I got to interview a lot of people, including Paul Reubens. And I got to be on a carpet, and it was disarming for celebrities when I said, hi, I'm Curt from hollywookie.com, a nerd's guide to Hollywood. Do you consider yourself a nerd? And they immediately went, oh, not what, tell me about this movie that's coming out. And there was a lot of times where I never even talked to them about the project they were on the red carpet for. And again, it seemed really to disarm them. And it seemed like I had nice, genuine conversations with people, which is what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I kept it going up until the pandemic. And at the pandemic, they all of my contacts, kind of contacted me and said, hey, we're only going to go with these big name people. And at that point, I'd been working for another thing called Red Carpet Report more and more. And they were big enough. So they kept going. And I was like, all right, it's time. I'm thinking about just closing down Holly Wookie. And right when I was toying with closing it, someone hacked it and then took over it. So I was like, oh, well, I guess it is done then. So it's gone.
Uh, I remember one particular incident involving Holly Wookie. You know, I already knew you at that point. I knew who you were. I knew about the website, but I think it was through Dan Harmon.
Yes.
You had attended a live recording of Harmontown, which was one of my favorite podcasts that ended a few years ago. And it was the episode. I think they were still doing it at Meltdown, right?
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
Nerd
Yeah.
Theater, and it was the episode where he had announced that he was going back to Community, if I'm not mistaken, and
That's correct.
you were the one who broke that news, right? Tell me a little bit about that.
It was so weird. Like, yeah, he came out and he was talking and doing this, Dan Harmon bit for Harmontown, and then he said, "Hey guys, I'm coming back to Community," and everybody's laughing. He's like, "No, I'm serious. I'm coming back to Community." And Jeff Davis was like, "I don't think we could talk about that." And he's like, "We'll talk about it." The whole night we were joking around like, "I don't know if this episode's ever going to air." Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. So the episode ended, and afterwards we would all go over to I'm blanking on the name of the bar, and it's
Oh, that like dive bar that they all
dive
hung
bar.
out at.
Yeah,
I don't remember the name either.
it's just But anyhow, so we went there, and we were all hanging out, and I said, "Hey Dan, I do a podcast, or I have a website called hollywookie.com." He's like, "That's a dumb name." And I said, "Can I talk about you coming back?" He's like, "Yeah, I don't care." And so I did. As soon as I got home, I wrote up a piece and I posted it out. And then the episode never aired. And then all of a sudden, like TMZ contacted me, and then it like the steamroll, like Hollywood Reporter, and it just steamrolled, and everybody was like, "First reported by hollywookie.com and officially known by hollywookie.com." And my site blew up. Drawing room. There we go. The drawing room.
The drawing room.
My site just blew up for a hot minute. And then Dan Harmon said, "I don't know who he's swearing like he does. I don't know who this Hollywookie is, but I never told him he could do that." And I got banned for a hot minute from Harmontown. And I had to go there and be like, "Hey man, I asked you and you gave me permission." He's like, "I don't remember that." I was like, "But
He was probably a few kettle ones into the evening.
Yes, he was." Yeah, and so it's since calmed down, but he did every now and then he would pull that out of his back pocket during Harmontown and talk about Hollywookie, and it was like, "Oh, Hollywookie's probably going to write about this," and I was like, "I don't even have a site anymore."
I did not know that whole story. I didn't know the part about you asking permission or getting banned. So thank you for sharing that. Anytime he would drop your site's name on the show, I'd always get a good chuckle. And then you are currently the host of what you just told me is a very popular podcast. I knew that you were doing it. I didn't know how much it had picked up steam. So congratulations on that. It's called Paranormal Almanac. What's been going on there? How did that get started? And tell people about, if they're not familiar with the show, what they can expect.
Sure. Yeah. Paranormal Almanac. It's a weekly podcast. It's a paranormal podcast, obviously. It's just something that I've always, anytime I would be at a party, it would devolve to talk about Star Wars, nerd stuff, Star Wars, or Bigfoot, Loch Ness. Like if anybody said they saw a ghost, I immediately would be like, "Oh, tell me everything. I want to know everything." And so I was like, why don't, I talk about this stuff all the time with my friends, ad nauseum sometimes, but I was like, why don't I do a podcast? So I started a podcast with a friend of mine called Drunken Metaphysical, where we get drunk and talk about paranormal, but that was just too much drinking for me. So I was like, that's got to stop. So I was like, I want to do my own thing. I don't want to rely on anybody else. And I'm just going to do my thing. My own little piece of the internet is all I wanted. And it just took off. It's a crazy top 100 podcast about the paranormal. And it's doing great. I mean, I always wondered, I'm like, well, how long can I talk about the paranormal? Surely I'm going to run out of Bigfoot stories or UFO stories. Nope, that's not the case at all. Last week, the government announced we have UFOs and alien bodies. I mean, you can't get better than that.
Yeah, it's everywhere these days. Yeah. Everybody's talking about UFOs. I'm still kind of on the skeptic side. I still want to
I consider myself a skeptic. Yeah, no, like that's the thing. I consider myself a skeptic, a skeptical believer, if you will. Like I need the proof. But I'll go down like the road with anybody that's talking about this stuff. But I still always but I need more. And it wasn't until like I started hearing from fans all around the world about like the lady in white ghost, and these people are like, "I don't believe in ghosts," and then they would tell me the scariest ghost story, or "I don't believe in UFOs," and they tell me the scariest UFO story. that I was like, all right, there is something here.
Right.
And then like, there's no reason for these men to have stopped their military careers to whistleblow for something that happened in 2004. And they did. And it's, like it's to the point where I'm like, I don't know how much more proof we can get, because now they're just flat out saying, yeah, we got UFOs. Yeah, we got alien bodies.
You know what? I would be ecstatic if they actually. I saw some quote from somebody saying like, "Oh, these are people making extraordinary claims, and it kind of requires extraordinary proof to back that up." But if we ever see that proof, I would just be ecstatic to find out that there's life.
Yeah.
That we know that there's life out there in the galaxy, and that they have actually visited us or whatever. That would be amazing. Like, I do really want to believe as well. I am probably at heart, I am more of a Mulder than a Scully.
I love it.
But check that out. Paranormal Almanac is the name of the podcast. And then the last thing I want to talk about with you about your personal pop culture existence is the way we met each other, and the way we know each other is by seeing each other basically at every They Might Be Giants concert in Southern California. My favorite band and yours, They Might Be Giants, they've been around for 40 years. And so I'm always afraid to tell people how many times I've seen them in concert, which I think is somewhere around 80. Curt, how many times have you seen They Might Be Giants in concert?
Well, technically I've lost count, but okay. I know it's in the 150s or 160s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you think it is about? I feel like this is actually kind of a good segue, because we're both into They Might Be Giants. We're both into Pee Wee Herman. What do you think it is about They Might Be Giants that appeals to the both of us and our specific personality types?
I don't know. I think it's the originality of the music. Like it's one of those things where, it hit at a specific time and it just connected with me, immediately connected with me, exactly like Pee-wee's Big Adventure did. Yeah. It was just that I was like, that's me. Like this is my thing. This is my, like, yes, I immediately connected to him on a level, and it just never went away.
I was thinking about this as I was showering earlier, because I had just talked to you via text. You had agreed to come on the show, and I was thinking about the connections between They Might Be Giants and Paul Reubens. And I was remembering, now you just went to a screening of the documentary Gigantic, which is go and find it if you can track it down, the feature-length documentary about the history of They Might Be Giants. And there's one part where they're talking about the personalities of the two Johns. They're both named John, the two lead songwriters and singers in the band. And John Linnell is described as being this kind of reserved, introverted guy who also has this part of his personality where he needs to express himself and he needs to perform. And I was thinking, oh, that's also Paul Reubens. Like, I feel like very, very timid, introverted person who has this other side to him, like a very similar, I don't know, does that strike you as like a parallel between those two things?
Yeah, no, that's a perfect description, because you're right. Like, I've been lucky enough to meet Paul Reubens and then to meet Pee Wee Herman. And it really was like I met two completely polar opposite different people.
And John Linnell is not necessarily, he doesn't, he has a stage presence, the stage persona, but he's not necessarily playing a character when he goes on stage. But still, I saw that similarity. So let's get into talking about Paul Reubens. And you kind of started along this path already, but tell me a little bit about how you first encountered him. Now, you're a little bit older than I am, but what age were you when Pee Wee was first on your radar?
I don't know what age it was. Like, I was trying to think of this a little bit ago. What year did Pee-wee's Big Adventure come out?
So that's 85.
Okay, perfect. So I was about 14, 15. That makes sense. Because, that makes perfect sense. How I got into him was my oldest brother went to see Pee-wee's Big Adventure and came home and went, "You've got to see this movie. Like, that's you." And I was like, "Oh, I'll go see this movie. That sounds cool. I love movies." So I went and saw the movie, and I'll be honest, like, I sat through the whole movie. I liked the whole movie, and I got home and I went, I don't know what I think. Like, I liked it, but I don't know what I think. And then all night long, I kept thinking about the movie and about how, like, just basically like childish and dumb it was. And by the morning, I went, I love this movie. I need to go see this movie again. And I walked to the theater to see the movie again.
Yeah.
And that time I was laughing and crying, laughing through the whole movie. And it just hooked me.
It's one of those movies that definitely you just never get tired of it. I think I
No.
could watch it a million times. I know it by heart, and I will never be bored of it, like, I'll never tire of that film. By the way, I wanna mention, we are recording this live. I forgot to say that up top, but we are recording this live via the Laughing Place YouTube. If you want to comment, we'll be happy to address your comments or questions. Kaylee Harry, Styles Bender. Oh, okay. A lot of names there. Hope that's a Futurama reference. Glad Futurama is back. That person is saying, "Hey, Laughing Place, R.I.P. Pee Wee Herman." Yes,
Yeah.
totally agreed. And
Yeah.
then Vanity on the Go just says Pee Wee exclamation point. So
Rightfully
can't
so.
disagree there. So just to get into my history with Pee Wee, I was 5 years old when the movie came out. I had not been aware of the character through his, they did the HBO special, I think was the first thing that was like nationally released or broadcast. But the movie was the first thing on my radar. It was something I bonded with my dad over because my dad was a comedy fan. He thought Pee Wee Herman was really funny. We would quote the movie to each other. We would reenact. I remember him especially loving the joke where he's hitchhiking and he's got the fake thumb. And then at the third car, he just gets frustrated and throws the thumb at the car. Like, for whatever reason, that moment stuck out to him. And then because of that, it became one of my favorite moments. And just all sorts of quotes from that movie. I'm trying to use the phone, like anything like that. It would just come up in like everyday conversations. So that was big for me, the movie. And then 6 years old, 86, the kids show starts. Pee-wee's Playhouse starts. I was the exact right age for that, and it was 4 seasons from ages 6 through 10 for me. So that I was the target audience for that show at that time in the late 80s. So I loved it. I watched it every week. I think it was on Saturday mornings, to my
Yep.
recollection. The new episodes would come out. Were you into that show being a bit
I was.
older?
I was. Even though I was like 16 at that point, I really was.
Yeah.
Because again, like it was at a time where, you couldn't just grab the DVD of Pee-wee's Big Adventure and watch it whenever. So this was my chance to to see Pee-wee, anytime I wanted, every week. And even though, like, actually, I will say not, I was going to say not a lot of my friends were watching it, but that's not true. A lot of my close friends were watching it as well, and enjoying it on probably a different level than you were enjoying it. Like
Yeah.
we got the other side of the jokes.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of, like, innuendos,
Yeah.
and I kinda mentioned the HBO special, which it's like the same format as Pee-wee's Playhouse, but definitely not geared toward kids.
Oh yeah.
It's more of an adult humor type thing, and this is we'll get into later on when he kind of revives this for the Broadway run and here in LA at Club Nokia. But, yeah, it's more toward the adult audience. Now, have you gone back and watched the original? Because my friend
Yes.
Tony, my coworker Tony, pointed out it's actually available right now on Max, no longer HBO Max, just Max. You can go and watch the original HBO. It's called The Pee Wee Herman Show is the name of the special. What were your thoughts, like, the first time you saw that?
Oh, that one blew me away. Like when I was first introduced to it, I was still living in Michigan. When I was first introduced to that, probably on HBO. Actually, it was on HBO.
Yeah,
I thought it was going to be the kid show. I was really thrown for a loop. And
right.
I was like, oh, I don't like how they're changing Pee-wee, not realizing it was
Yes.
how it started.
Yeah.
And again, it kind of grew with me the more I thought about it. And then I started really enjoying it. What was weird was that when I first moved out to California, I wanted to go see like the Pee-wee dinosaurs, and I saw
Yeah.
that, got my photo and everything. But I was actually working on 3rd Street Promenade at a shoe store. It was a kid's shoe store, so I could bring in kids movies. So I would bring in like Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and I was playing it on 3rd Street Promenade, and I noticed in the background there's a clock tower, and I went, "Oh my god!" And I walked out of my store and looked up, and there's the clock tower. So I ran back in, and I'm like, "I'm 2 stores down from Chuck's
Yeah.
Bike-O-Rama." I had no idea they filmed it there.
It's really funny that you mentioned that because as I was watching the movie a little earlier, I was making notes of like locations that I
Yeah.
had visited from the movie. Obviously, a lot of it was shot on the Warner Brothers backlot, which if you go and take the tour there, you'll spot all the different
Yeah.
locations. Like the fortune teller shop is there along the city street, and then obviously the whole end, the climactic action chase scene of the movie takes place on the Warner Brothers backlot. So of course that was all shot there. But they, like you said, the Third Street Promenade, you can see the Man Criterion Theater in the background when he's locking up his bike, and they've got the marquee says "Cartoon Cavalcade." I'll never forget that. And then the Cabazon dinosaurs, like you
Yeah.
mentioned, I was just there like 6 months ago. My friend and coworker Jeremiah and I stopped there on the way to Palm Springs, and I was thinking about, of course, Pee Wee's Big Adventure, and then also the movie The Wizard, which
Oh, yeah.
do you know that movie?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The, like, 2-hour commercial for Nintendo that came out in that same period. But, yeah, always love visiting, like, locations from movies that I loved growing up, a lot of which are obviously here in Southern California. So, I don't know, anything else you wanna say about Pee-wee's Big Adventure? 'Cause I feel like Pee-wee's Big Adventure to me is like the ultimate expression of this character. It's just so perfect, and the marriage of his style of humor and Tim Burton's directing. It was just like a match made in heaven. This is Tim Burton's first movie. Um, the dream sequences are so
Oh,
memorable.
yeah.
The humor, the writing, it was co-written with Phil Hartman, who has a little cameo appearance near the end. Anything else jump out at you that you want to remember about Pee Wee's Big Adventure?
No, just that, like you were saying, that it's a perfect movie to be like,
Yeah,
every time I go back and watch it, I'm always amazed at it's just it holds up so, so well. It was just such a
yeah.
perfect movie.
I love the breakfast machine sequence. That's got my favorite piece of the Danny Elfman score, and then the punchline of that scene. You know, it goes through this whole like Rube Goldberg contraption of making his eggs and bacon and fruit, and it all ends up on the same plate. He pours the Mr. T cereal on, and then he takes one bite of cereal and goes out to
Yep.
his tent, doesn't eat any of it. It's so good, so good. And then he followed that up with another movie called Big Top Pee-wee, which I saw in the theater, came out when I was 8, is 1988. I don't know if I've even seen it since then because it didn't make as big an impression on me. But do you know this movie? Are
I
you
do. Yeah.
yeah, what do you think of Big Top Pee-wee?
That one had to grow on me, not like the Pee-wees, like, I had to think about it one night. I had to watch it a few times before I started to enjoy it more and more and more, but it wasn't the Pee-wee that was before this. Like, it really
Yeah,
was, like, a departure for Pee-wee. And Paul Reubens talked about that before, that, like, they went a different direction than they should have gone, and that's why, like, like, the one that he just did with Joe Manganiello, he wanted to
yeah,
bring it back to the more childhood Pee-wee, not Pee-wee falling in love, because it was a different just a
right.
little bit different Pee-wee than everybody was used to.
Yeah, for whatever reason, that movie didn't stick with me in the way that Big Adventure has, and it's still, this is probably top 15 movies ever made for
Yeah.
me. I can revisit it and never tire of it, like I said earlier. And then, yeah, we've mentioned already Pee Wee's Playhouse ran for 4 years. So many memorable characters and situations. Phil Hartman back on that show again as Captain Carl. You got
Carl.
Lawrence Fishburne as Cowboy Curtis, and then a whole cast of characters and puppets and just wacky kind of thing that it was right up my alley at that age, obviously targeted. I was gonna mention, like, this it's kind of a pattern for stuff that I was into as a kid, but carried over into my adulthood. These things often started out as things that were for adults because it's true of Pee Wee Herman. It's also true of like the Muppets.
Oh, yeah.
Like the
Oh,
Muppets
yeah.
weren't necessarily a kids franchise. It was the humor was a little edgier, and then they toned it down a little bit, I think, for younger audiences. But I don't know. What do you think? Why do you think that is? Why do you think a lot of kids franchises started out as something that was a little edgier and for adults, but it can be like translated over. It's easily adaptable into a
Yeah.
kids franchise.
Yeah, no, you're right, because like the Muppets started with like sax and violins and was
Yeah.
even like on Saturday Night Live, it was way darker.
Oh
And you're
yeah.
right, they kind of figured out that medium level where the parents can enjoy it just as much as the kids. And I think that was like, I think that's the big thing of like that kind of a crossover, like that Bugs Bunny kind of a crossover where you can have the innuendo jokes and the more
Yeah.
adult jokes and have the kids fun stuff just so the kids will enjoy it as well.
Yeah.
And you're right, it does. It just keeps going. You can appreciate it throughout your life at a different level. Like you definitely had it. I was more of a teenager, but it still grew up. I grew up like as I could watch Pee-wee's or the Muppets or whatever. I got different jokes as
Yeah.
I got older. And you're right, it's something you grow with.
And Looney Tunes that you mentioned is another great example of that, where the cartoons weren't necessarily created for children initially, but it became known as a kid's property, I guess just because it's animated. And this is a whole other discussion, but yeah, it's a very interesting kind of phenomenon. Anyway, that was kind of the prime era of Pee Wee Herman, the mid to late 80s. There was that incident in 1991 that we don't have to go into. You know about it. I want to celebrate this guy's work. I also think even at that age when it happened, I thought it was overblown. But it basically derailed his career. You know, the other thing I want to mention, Kurt, I don't know if you knew this, but I was just doing a little bit of research today. Paul Reubens auditioned to be a cast member on Saturday Night Live. Did you know
Yep.
this?
Yeah, yeah.
And this is after that first 5 seasons with the original cast, and they were first creating that second cast for Saturday Night Live. When Lorne Michaels had left, it was Dick Ebersol, I think, or whoever, Gene Dominion was running the show, and he didn't get it and was beat out by Gilbert Gottfried to join the cast of Saturday Night Live. And I was thinking, wow, what a different path that would have
Oh,
taken him on.
definitely. But he also chose another different path. Like, I don't know if you know this one. He was they wrote the part of Gozer in Ghostbusters for Paul Reubens. And he
I
turned it
remember
down.
hearing that. Yeah.
Like there's so many choices throughout his career that I was like, why wouldn't you have done that? Or what would have happened if you would have gotten that?
He
Yeah.
was a very particular guy who he kind of knew what you probably read the statement that he wrote over this past weekend when he knew he was passing away. And he wrote that he enjoyed making art for everyone. And that really struck me as like, yes, this is art. Pee Wee
Yeah.
Herman is art,
Oh yeah.
and it's probably not, those two words in the average consumer aren't going to cross paths, but I definitely do think popular culture qualifies as art, especially something like this character that has moved and touched and made so many people happy for this long. Absolutely, it's art, and he saw it as art as well, and that's why he was so choosy about the projects that he got himself involved with. So we had this big gap where Paul Reubens would he was kind of in the shadows a little bit, but then he started popping up in little roles here and there. And we'll talk about his non-Pee-wee roles a little bit later. But I want to just follow through on talking about the later Pee-wee Herman stuff because you and I think both attended
Yeah.
the Club Nokia show, which was kind of a revival of the Pee-wee Herman show. By the way, the Pee-wee Herman show, I think originally had been performed at the Roxy Theater, which is still there on Sunset Boulevard, the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood. And then this was at the Club Nokia, which was a relatively new venue at the time. Tell me a little bit about going to see that show.
Yeah. I was out of work at the time and I hocked everything I could so I could buy a ticket for it because I was like, there is no possible way I'm missing this. And I don't know if you remember, but if you got the first night, it was actually at a different venue. And then
Okay.
they moved it to Club Nokia to make a bigger venue.
Okay.
And when they did that, I was like, oh no, because it's for a minute there, it sounded like you lost your ticket and you had to go buy another ticket. And I was really worried because that's all the money I had. And so thankfully Ticketmaster worked with me. They got me the ticket, same value and everything. And because they moved the venue, opening night, you got to meet and greet the entire cast of the show. And it was magical. Like no joke. Like I was up at almost like at the very last row of the balcony at Club Nokia. And when you walked into the theater, there was the stage. There was Pee-wee's Playhouse right
Yeah.
there, and somehow, and I still don't know to this day how they did it, because like if you've ever been on a sound set or a soundstage or anything, it doesn't look as good in person. It's
Right.
always like looks fake. This, I walked in and it looked better than it ever did on TV. It was somehow the colors were brighter, the contrast was brighter.
Yeah.
I was a kid again, and I was just absolutely in love and smiling from ear to ear from the beginning to the end. Eh,
I had a blast as well, and I think I didn't go the first night. I went sometime later on during the run, and I stood there was, like, standing room behind the lower section at Club Nokia, and that's where I remember being, for that show. But yeah, just super, super memorable and amazing to see him perform that character in person. Like, I just feel honored that I got to see that in my lifetime.
Oh, me
But,
too. Like, it was
yeah,
without a doubt. Like, I ended up going 2 more times. I won a pair
yeah,
of tickets for the last show, and I went in the middle of the run, and it was 3 different shows. Like, they changed the
okay,
show as it went, and which was fantastic. But do you remember in the middle of the show, he takes off his purity ring and he throws it into the audience?
okay.
So the second show, I ran downstairs and after the show and was just scouring, and I found the ring that he threw in the audience. And I was like, "Oh my god, like, nobody picked this up? Nobody cared?" And I, I still have it, it's somewhere, and it's like one of my prized possessions,
Yeah.
like, of all time, but obviously, besides actually meeting the full cast was just incredible.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm so glad that he got to do that and that we both got to go. And then that show moved to New York and became a Broadway show for a pretty good run. And then that was recorded for another HBO special that I think I'm not sure if that's still on HBO or Max right now, but if you could track that down, you can see what that whole thing was like. And then kind of the last big Pee-wee project, the, official, feature-length Pee-wee movie that we got was on Netflix. It was called Pee-wee's Big Holiday. Now this was directed by Judd Apatow, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Or
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So Judd Apatow picked up the reins for Pee-wee's Big Holiday. Like you said, it starred Joe Manganiello as kind of the man crush for Pee
yeah.
Wee Herman. I similarly to Big Top Pee-wee, I have not watched this again since I saw it the first time, but I will say I really enjoyed it when I saw it. I just am busier as an adult, so
Sure.
I haven't had a chance to go back and revisit it. What are your thoughts on Pee-wee's Big Holiday?
I loved it because
Yeah,
for the first time ever, it was again, it was a different Pee-wee, but it was Pee-wee again. They
yeah,
de-aged him, they made him look like Pee-wee, and it just worked for me. Like, it really did. It was such a bizarre choice of a story that they wanted to tell, but
yeah,
it's also a story that he'd been wanting to tell about Pee-wee forever. So it was like an old script, really, and they just
right.
kind of modernized it, him and Judd Apatow. And like you said, he had a man crush in the whole show, and it was fantastic. And it was, him back with his toys, and it was fun to see Pee-wee do Pee-wee again.
Because every interview that you would see with Paul Reubens between, like, 1995 and whenever this movie came out finally, I think it was probably, like, 2013, 2014,
Yeah.
he would always mention, "Oh, I'm writing another Pee-wee movie. I'm writing another Pee-wee movie." And you would always think, "Oh, I'll believe it when I see it." And finally, it did happen for him, so I was really happy that they followed through. I think I'm gonna revisit this one
You should.
for
I
sure.
honestly think you should. And I will say, like, I don't think I'm talking out of school because it never came to fruition as far as I know. They were actually talking. He actually was talking with a buddy of mine about making a Pee-wee show again, but
Yeah.
a cartoon, and he was just going to voice it. So he
Mm,
thought that Pee-wee could live on for perpetuity
yeah.
just in animation. And I mean, the stories that I had heard, I was like, oh my god, this is perfect. It's the perfect venue or whatever vehicle for Pee Wee Herman from this point on.
Yeah, that would have been cool to see. I'm sorry that never happened. But those are all those projects we listed are all the kind of the major places to find Pee Wee Herman.
Yeah.
Um, and if you were to consume all of those, you'd have a pretty good concept of the path of that character. But what I want to ask you now, Kurt, is why do we love Pee Wee Herman? Now you were a teenager. I was a child. What clicked about Pee Wee Herman for you?
I think that, I mean, me personally, I can only speak for myself of why
Yeah.
what worked for Pee-wee was that he was everyone as a kid. We
Yeah.
all did the dumb stuff. We all did the dumb jokes, and it just worked. Like, I bought the big ear when after I saw the movie. I went to a magic store. I used to love going to magic stores. So there was so much stuff that I saw in Pee-wee that I saw as myself as a kid. And I was like, yeah, it's just, it brings it back to, I remember the good old days. I remember Saturday morning cartoons and eating cereal and, like, and always weird cereals like the Mr. T cereal.
Yeah.
Like it was always like some branded weird, like Ghostbuster cereal or C3POs or whatever. And, so it always connected back to a better time as a kid, a
Yeah.
freer time when there was no responsibilities and you can just have fun. And I think that's what, drew me to it and keeps me drawing to it.
Something appealing to me about an adult who acts like a kid. I don't know why. I think at that age, you always want to be friends with adults, but you always want them to be into the same things that you're into.
Yeah, yeah.
And Pee Wee was exactly that. He was an adult in, or he was a kid in an adult's body. Like in the movie, he behaves like a child. His favorite thing in the world is a bicycle. Uh, he plays with toys, but he
He
lives
cares
by
he
him.
cares he cares more
Yeah,
about Speck than he does about Dottie,
right,
in the grand scheme of things.
right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, he's largely like asexual
yeah.
in the first movie. Yeah, but at the same time, he like lives by himself. He's clearly like an adult. He doesn't have parents that he's not like what's that Martin Short movie, Clifford or whatever. You remember, Charles
Yeah, yeah,
Grodin?
yeah.
He's not like that type of a character where he's an adult playing a child. He is an adult, but he just has the mind of a child, kind of. There's really no logical explanation for how he lives his life because he doesn't seem to have a job,
No, that's what I was just gonna
right?
say. You know what, though? It's almost like what would happen if I would have won the lotto when I was,
Right.
or maybe even now. I would do all of the dumb things that Pee-wee did and
Maybe
have
that's
way.
the backstory. That could be the backstory of Pee Wee Herman. He won the lotto when he was 8 years old and just never progressed past that point. But yeah, there's something about like, oh, you can just hang on to your childhood.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I think I have done that or I've tried to do that a little
Oh,
bit.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Uh, and yeah, just the humor. I was thinking at the beginning of Big Adventure, Pee-wee's a little bit of a jerk. I mean, he has an
Oh, yeah.
arc, but
Oh,
he's
yeah.
he's rude to people. He blows people off, and he's just kind of like in his own little world. That scene where he gathers everybody in the basement and he's giving them all the clues about where to find the bike.
What
He
does
doesn't
it mean?
care about
I
what's
don't know. Yeah, 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 you're right. He is not and all of his friends are there, all trying to help him, and he's
yeah.
getting more and more unraveled and bent. Yeah, you're right. He's not a nice guy.
Right. He's like completely self-obsessed and not really self-obsessed actually, because he doesn't seem to have a big ego that much. He's just in his own little world and all he cares about is what he's interested
Yeah.
in.
Yeah,
And I
he's
guess
hyper
like
fixated. Yeah.
it's almost kind of like only child syndrome and maybe I relate to it a little bit for that reason. I don't know. Were you an only child growing up
No, no.
or
Nope, 2
you
older
yeah,
brothers.
that's right.
So yeah,
You
yeah,
you,
yeah,
you said yeah
yeah.
earlier. So I don't know. Something it's hard to put my finger on exactly what it is about Pee Wee Herman that is so appealing, but obviously he's a very funny character. I don't know, but there were other I feel like the 80s were a great era for the persona of the comedian. Even
Yeah,
Gilbert Gottfried came out
yeah.
of that era and his persona developed over that decade. But then I was thinking about a similar character, you know, similar in the path that this character took in the pop culture universe is Ernest.
I knew you were gonna say
Uh,
that. Yep.
yeah, Jim Varney, who I was also a fan of, and I also was very
Yeah.
sad. He also died of cancer. Well, how long ago was that? 15 years ago, maybe. But were you a fan of Ernest as
I
well?
was. I really was. I remember him when he was just doing those commercials for
Yeah,
I thought he was just like a local Michigan guy. I didn't realize that it was like a national commercial for car commercials or wherever it was. But yeah, it was the same kind of a thing. Here's this
right.
weird skinny guy that is, hyper fixated and odd, but for some reason I was like, "Yep, I like him."
Yeah, I wonder what it was about that era that made these comedians like pick this very kind of you know what it was actually, it was probably the Groundlings, which is where
True.
Paul Reubens got his start.
Phil Hartman, yeah.
I don't know Jim Varney's history in theater or whatever, but I know Groundlings, part of the training there is you're encouraged to create characters like that and stick with them. So, yeah, for whatever reason, he just adopted that persona and stuck with it. It didn't become like, it's not like, Sacha Baron Cohen, who's got all these crazy different characters. It's really just Paul Reubens became Pee Wee, and that was his public persona for so long. We'll talk about that a little bit more too.
Yeah.
But I want to start talking about some of the other roles that we know Paul Reubens from. And I think the reason that I kind of was able to tie it back into doing an episode of this podcast, paying tribute to Paul Reubens, is because he does have the Star Wars connection. Now, he was cast as the voice of Captain Rex, the droid pilot in Star Tours, which opened in 1987 at Disneyland, a little bit later on down at Walt Disney World. What's your history with that attraction, Curt?
It's actually it was great. I was lucky enough to go first on that ride with my friend Heidi, and she wouldn't tell me anything about it. She knew I was a big Star Wars fan, as is she. And she wouldn't tell me anything about it. And I was like, well, what's in it? Who's in it? Because I'm a ride wimp. You would hate to go to Disneyland with me, Mike. I'm a ride wimp. But I was like, yeah, I'll go. It's Star Wars. I can handle it. And the second Rex talked, I went, oh my God, Paul Reubens, like as loud as I possibly could. And she started laughing. And then the next time I wrote it, it was a little while later. They were doing, I don't remember how I got into Disneyland. They gave me a pass. I went to Disneyland and I walked out of Star Tours absolutely in love. And I was like laughing and loving the ride, and went out to the gift shop, and I'm like, I'm going to buy everything Star Tours. This is where I'm going to buy all my Star Wars stuff. And Steven Sansweet was behind me.
Oh,
and laughing about how I was just running. He said he watched me run from like this side to this side. I have to get this and I have to get that. And what's that? And what's this? And he was talking to me a little bit about Star Wars and Star Tours. So it just instantly became, besides, again, I already probably would have been, but because of those two things, it became like my favorite ride at Disneyland for the longest time.
yeah.
Yeah.
So how devastated were you when they changed it?
I was really, look, I love C-3PO, don't get me wrong, but I
Yeah.
was mad when they changed. There was
Yeah.
no reason to change it. And I didn't know, obviously, that he would then become a DJ, but I just thought they
Right.
just pulled him completely for no reason, and I was so angry.
I'll say in recent years, I have grown to accept the idea that theme parks are just gonna be changed. Your favorite attraction is gonna go away at some point, or it's gonna have the guts ripped out, and
Oh.
something else is gonna. I know. I held on to that for so long. I was like, no, certain things need to stay the way they were. But I'm
Well, I
just
can
like,
give you an example of that. The one thing that needs to stay the way it is, and there's proof of it now, is
yeah,
the Tiki Room. Have you ever been
right.
to the Walt Disney World Tiki Room?
I know the legend of like under new
Oh,
management or
oh,
yeah.
oh, that's proof of don't change some things.
Sure. Well, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Enchanted Tiki Room does change eventually, but yeah, it seems like one of those. I mean, it has changed actually because
Yeah,
the original show was longer. They've cut it down,
yeah.
but yeah. As far as Star Tours goes, I kind of wish they would bring back, like, have one ride vehicle committed
Yes.
to
Yeah,
the original version. Like,
yeah.
you can choose whether you want to go on the original version or not. They can do that. This is within their power. I think it's possible.
Yeah, I would do it, and I would choose the original probably every time.
Yeah. But like you, I was upset when that went away. I'm not as big a fan of this Adventures Continue version for a variety of reasons. One of them is definitely the fact that I miss Paul Reubens as Captain Rex. But yeah, and then we got that announcement finally that Rex would make his return as the DJ in the cantina at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. The cantina is called Oga's Cantina, of course. Definitely one of my favorite hangouts within the last, I mean, it opened in 2019. It was closed for a year in between there at some point, but pretty much every time I'm at Disneyland now, I try to get on the waiting list, go have a drink in Oga's. What do you hang out in in the cantina
Yeah.
in Galaxy's Edge.
Every time, the same thing. That's the one thing that I
Yeah.
have to do. I have yet to go on Rise of the Resistance,
Okay.
but I will go to
All right.
Oga's every
I
time.
will say, yeah, at least once go and ride Rise of the Resistance, but then you can go and hang out in Oga's
Yeah,
afterwards. It's worth at least going on it once. But yeah, what a great way to follow up on the story of this character to kind of have him relocated over there and given a new assignment, a new career as the DJ in Oga's Cantina. And I love the script, I love the performance, I love everything about what they did with him in there. There's that great moment. There's a few references to the old Star Tours
oh,
ride
yeah, oh, yeah.
in his loop. I don't know how long the loop is, 45 minutes or whatever. But there's a great moment where he shuts down and they kind of have to reboot him. And when he comes back to life, he starts spouting lines from his memory from the Star Tours attraction. So love DJ Rex. Glad to have him hopefully permanently there in Star
I
Wars
hope so.
Galaxy's Edge. Yeah, great character. Anything else you want to say about that before we move on to other stuff?
No, I mean, I was lucky enough to go to a cast night for Tomorrowland when they revamped Tomorrowland,
Yeah.
and I got to see behind the scenes of how far the ride actually goes, like the actual vehicles go.
Right.
And had I seen that prior to going on it, I probably would never have gone on it. It's
Yeah.
insane.
I've seen footage of that. I haven't seen it in person, but somewhere, and maybe it was in the Imagineering story on Disney Plus or whatever, but they've shown that footage and I was like, wow, it moves way more than I would have
Yeah.
guessed. But yeah, I know they had adapted some technology from the space program or something
Yeah.
for use in that ride. So very cool. Okay, so other smaller roles that you may know Paul Reubens from. Now, I grew up on a movie called Flight of the Navigator, which is another Disney connection, and this is sort of the precursor to Captain Rex and Star Tours. He played the voice of the little robot alien. It almost kind of looks like the thing that comes out of Jabba's
Yeah.
palace to
Yeah. Yeah.
talk to you. And the kid calls him Max in the movie. Do you like Flight of the Navigator, Kurt?
I love that movie. That was another
Yeah.
one that again, it's because I think of Paul Reubens that it just I kept going back to it and loving it. And when I went to Disney World, they had the actual ship back there. I don't know if they still
Yes.
do. I was so happy to see that as an adult because I love
Right.
that movie. It's one that doesn't get enough love.
Yeah, it's kind of a cult that's kind of a cult hit, The Flight of the Navigator. I think that's on Disney Plus. You can track that down. Great Paul Reubens performance in that. And it's almost kind of like a sort of a Twilight Zone type of
Yeah.
plot of time travel and um I won't spoil too much about it if you haven't seen it, but definitely recommend you go and check that out. Who's the is it Elizabeth Shue that's in the no, it's not. It's uh
I can't
there's
think.
an actress who's in that grew up to be somebody who's like oh no, it's Sarah Jessica Parker
Oh, yes.
who
You're
is
right.
like
You're right.
his
Yep.
like caretaker when he's in the NASA holding facility or whatever. But yeah, check it out. Flight of the Navigator. I remembered being ecstatic when he popped up in Batman Returns as the Penguin's father. Very small role. Did you have any memories of that?
Yeah, I was thrown for a loop. In fact, I had to go, was that Paul Reubens? And then all
Yeah.
of my friends were like, what? I didn't see that. And then I had to eventually watch it again because I was a huge Batman fan. I was like, it was Paul Reubens. I knew it. Yeah.
So I just found this out today. Did you know about this? I was doing research, like I said. He popped up on the show Gotham, which
Yeah.
I gave up on pretty early on, but he also played the Penguin's father on Gotham
Yep.
for a few episodes. I had no idea. Have you seen any of that?
I've only seen it online because I stopped watching as well. I gave up
Yeah.
real quick on it. But someone posted like, hey man, you should be watching it. Look who's on there. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And I watched just those clips and I was like, I'm good.
Okay. I knew he was in the Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the original movie with Christy Swanson, and then really recently on What We Do in the Shadows.
Almost coming back as the same character. Yeah.
Yeah, they kind of paid tribute to that, where he played a vampire called Paul. I don't know if I've ever actually sat down and watched the whole movie, the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie. Do you know much about his role in that?
He's the only reason you should watch it.
Yeah,
Honestly, his performance was so brilliant. And I'm not just saying it because I'm just a huge fan of his. No, his performance was so brilliant that it's the only memorable thing about that movie. It was
Okay.
fantastic.
All right. Well, I'll have to check that out. Maybe I'll have a Paul Reubens a thon. I love him in Nightmare Before Christmas. He's one of the three little trick or treaters, Lock, Shock, and Barrel. So
Yep.
he's Lock. And then if you were to go to see, Danny Elfman would do these big shows at the Hollywood Bowl where he'd perform the songs from Nightmare Before Christmas live. Often Paul Reubens would come out and perform that role with, like, Catherine O'Hara was one of the other ones, and I forget who the third Lock, Shock, or Barrel is, but, are you a Nightmare fan?
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
Again, like, Tim Burton won me over with Pee-wee's, so I've stuck with him, but Nightmare was another one of those that was just fantastic, and it wasn't obviously, it wasn't because of Paul Reubens on that one. It was just a great Tim Burton vehicle, and then later found out, "Oh, that was Paul Reubens as well." Of course it was. I love him.
Yeah. Alexander Lee in the comments wants to know, do you like James and the Giant Peach? Now, James and the Giant Peach was directed by Henry Selick, who many people don't connect is actually the director of The Nightmare Before Christmas. It's the
Oh,
title is Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas, but he just wrote the story, the original poem. The idea was from him, but the director was actually Henry Selick. That guy went on to do James and the Giant Peach and a bunch of other really good stuff. I like that movie. Have you seen that?
I
Uh,
haven't seen that movie in years, probably a
okay.
couple of decades, but I remember really liking it when it was out, yeah.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I'm a sucker for stop motion animation.
That would
Um,
explain why they have a Jack in James and the Giant Peach.
there you go.
There
There
you
you
go.
go. By Roald Dahl. Yes, the writer of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Same dude. Let's see. Murphy Brown. I never watched that show, but he had a recurring role on there in the 90s. Mystery Men. I remember this movie with Ben Stiller. What a great cast and kind of a okay movie. I don't know. What are your thoughts on Mystery Men? He played the
I
spleen.
I have big time thoughts on this movie. I
Okay.
actually auditioned for
Oh,
Mystery Men.
all right.
Like when they're auditioning the superheroes in
Yes.
Mystery Men? That
And like
was something.
Janine Garofalo is there
Yeah,
and Dane Cook, I think
yeah,
was one.
yeah. You could
Yeah.
just do that. If you were in, Cenex Casting, that's just now Central Casting, you could, if you came up with your own idea, you could go and audition. So I did. I was just never shown on film. But
Okay.
I was there. I ran to a thrift store and just started finding all the, because they said, "Make it as dumb as possible." And I found a wetsuit. I found a bag of, like, nipples for, like, baby bottles, and then I found a super soaker, and I was called the lactator, and I filled the super soaker with milk, and I was spraying milk, and I'm like, "I'm the lactator," and they all laughed, and they were all like, "Oh, it's just too weird." And so
You went too far with it.
I did. I went too far, and it's such a bummer because I didn't. I had obviously at that point I had no idea that I could have been in a movie with Paul Reubens, and it would have been the best thing in the
Oh,
world.
yeah. That's a bummer that you didn't make the final cut there, but, yeah, I have memories of that movie being, there were funny moments and stuff, but, nothing to, write home about. But, this movie Blow, I think that was it Jonathan Demme or one of the Demmes? Blow, is one of the rare, like, dramatic performances of Paul Reubens. I remember him getting a lot of attention from that. Have you seen that film?
Oh yeah, and it really was. It was a shock to see him in that portrayal, and in like such a dramatic, drug dealy kind of movie.
Yeah,
Um, and again, he kind of just steals the scenes anywhere he
right.
goes. Like even as the spleen, he kind of stole the scenes from like what you said. You're right. It's a mediocre movie, but boy, he
Yes,
made it his own when he was on the camera.
right, and that was a great thing about Mystery Men was the cast, but I totally agree with you about anytime you would see Paul Reubens pop up. Like, I remember him being in, Reno 911 a couple
Yep.
times, like, here and there, he would just he was I think comedians are fans of Paul Reubens. So anytime it's like a show that's run by comedians, like I remember he was on Portlandia.
Sure.
Uh People would always want to cast Paul Reubens and I'm sure they either grew up being a fan of his or just knew him as a fellow comic or whatever, but it was always a joy to see him pop up on movies or TV shows
Yeah.
at any point in the last 4 decades or so.
Yeah, my favorite non-Pee-wee role that he ever
Yeah.
did was Prince Gerhardt on 30 Rock.
Okay. Yeah,
And
you mentioned that in the text, and I forgot to add it to my
oh, no,
note,
it's okay.
but
I was
please,
like, "I'm gonna talk about it because it was so brilliant."
yeah.
A
Oh,
and
look at this. Tony Betty, great
yes,
spot on 30
yes,
Rock too.
right? It's brilliant, and what I like about when all of the big comedians that honored Paul today all brought up that 30 Rock role
Uh-huh.
because it is Paul Reubens to a T. And it's almost kind of a shame that he's he's Pee-wee. I get it. He always will be Pee-wee, but he's so brilliant in every little role. And like I said, he just steals the scenes. And that's what he did in 30 Rock. He stole that entire episode. It was brilliant.
I've seen all of 30 Rock, and I gotta go and revisit this because I don't remember what he did on that show, but, that's something that I'm gonna go through again and see, 'cause, now that you're talking about it, I feel like I gotta revisit that.
Yeah.
But, the last kinda little cameo I wanna mention to kind of bring it back around to Star Wars is he did pop up again, reprising his role as a Star Tours droid pilot on the animated series Star Wars Rebels, which is a great show in and of itself. If you haven't seen it, go check that out, especially with Ahsoka coming up at the end of next month. You're going to want to get a primer on Star Wars Rebels, but he does play a Star Tours pilot, RX-24, in Star Wars Rebels. So a fun cameo tying it back into the parks and making Star Tours part of the current canon, which is awesome. So very cool there. Let's talk about having met Paul Reubens, Curt, because you mentioned earlier you got to do the cast meet and greet at Club Nokia. Had you encountered him before or after
Well,
that? So
after that, yes, but that
okay,
was the first time. Um, it was absolutely bizarre. I've never been more I don't get nervous when I meet celebrities, very rarely. Like Steven Spielberg was like the only other
yeah,
celebrity that I got nervous
me
about.
too.
And I was so nervous not to meet Paul Reubens, but to meet Pee Wee Herman.
Yeah,
And so we got in line and it was a really long line. And I was like, I don't even care. I'm going to stay here all night if I have to. And I had a really bizarre encounter with Steven Adler of Guns N' Roses in line. And it was weird. The whole experience was weird. But then he comes out and the entire line quieted down. It was incredible. It was like meeting Elvis. Like he walked out and everybody got quiet. And we all just anticipate, like people pulled out their figures or whatever. I didn't bring anything because I didn't want to have it. I didn't want to get ruined or anything because I had a lot of vintage Kiwi stuff. So I just had
yeah,
him sign the playbill. And he was the first signature as well. So when you walked up, it was him first. And it was him as Pee Wee. And I just profusely thanked him for everything he's ever done. And I told him that this show was like a lifetime dream of mine. And he smiled and just kind of like that and kind of winked at me. And I moved on because I didn't know what else to say. I had no idea what else to say. I'm sure he said something, but I couldn't tell you what it was.
right.
And then I went down the line and I met everybody, except for Jambi wasn't out yet. He
John
was
Paragon.
Yeah, he was still trying to like take off the zombie makeup and everything. So I went down the line and Miss Yvonne was last. And I was really excited to meet her as well. And she signed my thing. And then they were like, okay, please leave. And that's when John Paragon walks out as Zombie, still in the zombie makeup. And I stopped and I said, oh my God, no. I didn't get his autograph. That's Zombie. And the guy was like, the security guard's like, nope, sorry, man. There's one and done. You got to go. And I was like, no, but he wasn't out yet. And Miss Yvonne came walking up, grabbed me by my hand and said, no, to the security guard. She goes, no. And she walked up and she said, Zombie, he would love to meet you. And then I looked over and Pee Wee, not Paul, Pee Wee
Right.
smiled and went, Zombie. And it was the best thing ever.
Also, we should mention John Paragon had passed away
Yeah.
within the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years as
Yeah.
well. And I was very sad to hear that too, because he was such a big part of this Pee Wee universe. But that's a really great story. And I've encountered Paul Reubens twice, kind of in the wild, and both were kind of similar. He came across, he wasn't in character as Pee Wee Herman the way you got to meet him there. But one time I was working at Rockefeller Center in New York City, and I would always check to see who the guests on Conan were when I was working there because I could get into the show pretty easily. You just get in the standby line. If you like the guest, you just go in standby line, you get in the show, especially if you're one person, it's pretty easy to get in. And one time it was Paul Reubens, and I think I was working late enough that I couldn't attend the show that day, but I brought this DVD with me just in case I could get out of work and go and hang out in the lobby there for him to come through that lobby of 30 Rock. And sure enough, he came out. There were actually a few other people waiting, and very, very timid, not super gregarious in person, but he was happy to sign this DVD for me. It was definitely like a very cool moment and a treasured possession of mine to this day, especially now. I
Yeah.
dug it up out of a box today. I was like, okay, this goes behind glass somewhere after today. And then the other time was at the grand opening of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. And if you go to my Instagram account, I put this up today. I remember waiting to go in to this event, the grand opening media event, and I saw Paul Reubens just kind of milling about, also waiting for the event to begin. I was like, holy moly, I'm in the same space as Paul Reubens again. And at that moment, the waiting area was kind of in what's called the Big Thunder Trail at Disneyland, there in Frontierland. And I didn't want to bother him then, but once we got inside and we kind of all went our different directions, I went to the cantina, which is one of my favorite spots. And soon enough, Paul Reubens comes in there and sees the DJ Rex animatronic for the first time and pulls out his phone and starts taking pictures and video of it. So I snapped a handful of pictures of Paul Reubens taking pictures of DJ Rex. Those pictures are up on my Instagram, who's the Bossk pod right now. And after he was done, I just kind of went up to him and I said, Mr. Reubens, do you mind if I take a photo of you with DJ Rex? And he was like, oh, no, thank you, though. I appreciate it, but no. So he politely turned me down, but it was still amazing to be there just like for that moment. Not very many people around, him getting to see it for the first time. So he came across to me both times that I interacted with him. He came across to me as very reserved and shy and not wanting to make a big deal of himself in that moment. But that always, I feel like that always tends to be my favorite kind of artist, like we were saying at the top with John Linnell. But did you say you had another interaction with him after?
I did. I was doing a red carpet and he was on the list and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to interview Paul Reubens. This is going to be fantastic. And he skipped the red carpet. And I was like, oh, it's a bummer. But they let us in. Like every now and then they'll let press in and you can go and get snacks or drinks or whatever. So I walked in and the bar was packed and I'm like, well, I'm not going to get a drink anyway. I'm going to go to the desserts. And so I walked over to the desserts and there he was. And I don't normally like they kind of, frown upon you talking to the guests if you're not really a guest, if you're there as press. But I was like, you know what? I'm not going to blow this chance. So I just walked up and I said, hey, Mr. Reubens, I got to meet your friend Pee-wee at the Nokia Theater a long time ago. And it was one of the highlights of my life. And he goes, oh yeah, he told me about you. And then just walked away. And I was like, that's all I needed. That's all I needed. He was so quiet when he said it. I was like, yep, that's perfect. I couldn't ask for anything better.
And that's a great segue to kind of the next thing I want to talk about. Like, you can see this DVD is autographed Pee Wee Herman. It's not autographed Paul Reubens. There's kind of that dichotomy there. And most people did know Paul Reubens as Pee Wee Herman. And even this interview that I was watching, there was like a 1981 interview. This is before he was nationally famous, but the interviewer was interviewing Paul Reubens and said, I think his first question was like, is Paul Reubens playing Pee Wee Herman or is Pee Wee Herman playing Paul Reubens right now? So I don't know. There's just, we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but this idea of like having these two personas, and one is it actually brought me back to the Batman universe. Like, is Batman the mask that Bruce Wayne puts on, or is Bruce Wayne the mask that Batman puts on? Like, that's one of my favorite aspects of Batman as a character. And this is something that carries over to the fact that this is something that is applicable to real people is just fascinating to me. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Curt?
I do. And you're right. It is. They're two separate entities. They really are. It's almost like I'm a huge fan of Puddles' Pity Party, Puddles the Clown.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough to meet Puddles as Puddles and then Mike Geyer. And it's the exact same thing. Mike is not Puddles and Puddles is not Mike. They are two separate entities. And you better get it right when you talk to them or they'll correct you. And it's exactly kind of what it was. And I think that's the only reason I got any kind of response out of Paul Reubens was that I said, "Your friend Pee
Oh
Wee."
yeah.
And and again, like I didn't need any more from that. And it kind of, like I said, it kind of bums me out because even Paul Reubens is Paul Reubens. Like I've been lucky enough to I'm lucky enough to know a lot of people that knew him as a friend. And they said that he was always there for the laugh in Paul Reubens' way, not in Pee Wee's way. But every now and then, if you were hanging out with him long enough, he would slip in a Pee Wee Herman joke, like "Why don't you marry it?" That kind of a joke. And they said that his eyes would light up just a little bit different when he did it. So there were, he really was two different people.
I think Conan O'Brien shared a story today that on on Twitter, I think he said, well, we're calling it X now. Twitter is now X. Conan said on his birthday and everyone's birthday, Paul Reubens as Pee Wee Herman would send people like kitschy gifts or whatever. Like it must have been fun to know him in that way.
Yeah, my buddy Chris, the only reason I'm gonna mention is that he mentioned it today.
Yeah.
He said he Paul Reubens never missed a birthday message and never missed sending him a Christmas card the entire time he ever met him.
Yeah.
And he laughed that some of the messages that Paul Reubens would send for the birthdays were definitely not kid friendly. Were definitely not safe for work. And he did it for the laugh. And I think that's Paul to a T, was that he would do stuff for the laugh, whether it was zany as Pee Wee or reserved as Paul.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up here by asking what is the legacy of Pee Wee Herman? What impact did that character have, both, the character specifically and Paul Reubens as a performer? Where did we see reverberations from this?
Yeah.
From the stone dropping in the pond, as it were, and you get the ripples of how did Pee Wee Herman impact popular culture, and do we think that that will carry on into the future? I think a great example, since we're both also fans of Weird Al Yankovic,
Yeah.
is Weird Al's Saturday morning kids show from the late 90s, which I know you're familiar with.
Yep.
And I think Al has said in a number of interviews that that was modeled pretty much directly off of Pee Wee's Playhouse, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So where else do we see the impact of Pee Wee Herman in popular culture, to your mind, Curt?
I think it cemented Tim Burton, like that Tim
Yeah.
Burton vibe, like Beetlejuice and everything. I really do think like it gave Tim Burton a vision that he probably would have gotten somewhere later down in life, but Pee Wee really kind of cemented it in. And I think that just like that humor, Paul's humor will live on forever. I think people can watch Pee Wee's Big Adventure 20 years from now and still enjoy it.
Yeah, I think it will. He's one of those people where he will survive through his work. And I think it was clear to him too, based on what he said in that statement, that he knew that as well, that he enjoyed making that stuff as much as we enjoyed consuming it, and he knew that it had that kind of impact on us and the world. And I breezed through his controversies. I don't want to dwell on them, but I will say that somebody who has brought this much joy to the universe, it's easy to forgive any minor indiscretions or whatever that he may have had, or whatever the misunderstandings were, or whatever the truth of those matters were. Like, um, it's heartbreaking to me that it detracted from the volume of stuff that he was able to release out into the world, because it all made me so very happy.
Yeah.
Anything else that you would like to say about Paul Reubens before we move on?
No, no. I mean, I think, this was a beautiful tribute to him, and I thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Sure. Thank you, Curt. So I wanted to kind of rearrange the order of the way we do things in this episode, because I knew up top it was going to get sad. So now we're gonna we're gonna transition into something a regular feature here on Who's the Boss. And since you are a first-time guest, you legally do have to do something called the 5 Star Wars questions. This is where we get to know our guests, give us a baseline of our
Okay.
guests' Star
All
Wars
right.
fandom.
Yep.
How you feeling about this? Are you ready
I
for
like it.
this?
I'm ready. I'm ready. Yep. I
Okay,
like it.
let's do it. Number 1, what is your earliest Star Wars memory?
That's easy. Seeing A New Hope opening weekend. My mom, always tried to find stuff to take us to and kind of, give herself an hour or two of free time. And so she took us to see A New Hope and then went, uh-oh, because she knew like as soon as it started, as soon as it started going, she saw in my eyes like, oh no, I'm gonna have to buy everything Star Wars from this point on in life. And it's true to this day. And there's not a year that goes by that I don't get a Star Wars gift since Star Wars came out.
So you're of the original Star Wars generation,
Yeah,
and it's
7 years
pretty
old.
much stuck with you your entire life. Now, was there a period there? Now, I was too young to have seen the original trilogy in the theaters, but I was also the right age to be disappointed by the prequels. What has your relationship been like over the decades? Were you constantly, consistently a fan, or did you have like peaks and
No.
valleys?
No, there's definitely a valley.
Okay.
Yeah, like thankfully back then a movie would stay in the theaters for years. So I
Yeah.
saw Star Wars on the first birthday they called it. And I do remember like I don't know how many times I saw it in the theater, but it'd probably be about like 13 times in the theater. And then Empire, I probably only saw a few times in the theater. And then I got so mad at my buddy Johnny Puron because his mom took him out of school on Return of the Jedi opening day to go see it. And so he got to see it before all of us. And I still am a bigger fan. So that always angered me. And then there was like that little dark period, but we
Yeah.
had the Ewok Adventures. And
Right.
I also remember watching the holiday special when it aired. And my
Mm.
parents hated every second of it. And it didn't matter to me that it was terrible because it was Star Wars. And I was just, like anything, like what they're gonna do Star Wars on Donnie and Marie. I gotta watch it, that kind of stuff. And then the Ewok Adventures, I went through all that. And then I was one of the I didn't stay for a week in front of the Man's Chinese, but I was the first screening after those people went in to go see the screening. So I built a Gonk droid costume and I walked
Wow.
around as a Gonk droid and all these weird like Japanese TV people were interviewing me as a Gonk droid. And then I watched the movie and went, "Oh, man, this isn't my Star Wars. This isn't for me." And I've never like I know a lot of people have now since like softened to the prequels and were like,
Yeah.
"Oh, there's good." I haven't yet. I really have never really gone back and watched them that much.
They're still pretty tough for me to watch
Yeah,
as well.
they
I
really
think
are.
episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, I
Yeah,
can stomach it,
there's some good
but the
parts. Yeah.
yeah. But that's neither here nor there. I want to apologize again for not having you on the show earlier because you're such an OG Star Wars guy, and I just enjoy talking to you.
Yeah,
So,
of course.
um, yeah. Number 2, which is your current favorite Star Wars movie or TV show, and why?
So this was a tough one, but I'm gonna go back to the one I know it's the cool thing to say, like, "Oh, Empire Strikes Back is the best movie," but it
Yeah.
really was, like, even though there was the one I didn't see the most, Ret Empire and Return of the Jedi are like I flip-flop back through life, and I don't care, I love the Ewoks, so I'll go back and forth, but I still wanna say Empire, and then if it was like, no, it can't do the originals, it would be Rogue One. Like, Rogue One
Okay.
really brought me back to feeling Star Wars.
I got to rewatch Rogue One recently when they put it in the El Capitan theater. I forget why. I guess for Andor.
Yeah,
Maybe it was for
it
Andor.
was, yeah.
Uh, and that movie is great. I
Yeah,
think that movie is really, really solid.
yep.
Boy, what a terrific film. So yeah, no argument there. Number 3, who is your favorite Star Wars character and why?
Gonk Droid. And I don't know why, but ever since I was a kid, Gonk Droid has always been my favorite character, and it doesn't do anything. It's not important by any stretch.
Well, maybe you know the answer to this question because I was wondering recently, when did people start calling it the Gonk Droid? Because the action figure was called a Power
Yeah.
Droid.
Yeah, I knew it as Power Droid forever. Yeah.
I got to ask Richard Wolosky, my other OG Star Wars fan buddy about this because I don't know. I mean, obviously he says Gonk,
Yeah.
but when did people start calling him that? Was that from the beginning or what? I
No,
don't
no,
know.
it definitely wasn't from the beginning because I knew him as a power droid up until probably the 90s when people started calling him Gonk Droid, and they called him a Gonk Droid in like a couple of the books. And I was like,
Right.
oh, I guess he's Gonk Droid
And
now.
then they retconned the Gonk droid into being called the GNK series
Yep. Yep.
power droid, which is just terrific. I love how Star Wars is malleable in that way. Number 4, if you happen to live in the fictional Star Wars universe, where do you think you would fit in? Which faction would you belong to? The Jedi, the Sith, the Rebel Alliance, the Empire, the Bounty Hunters, the scum and villainy hanging out in the cantina, or anything else you might be able to come up with? What do you think, Curt?
I used to say Jedi as a kid, but as an adult, I don't want to be a Jedi.
Yeah.
They're so restrictive on you can't fall in
Right.
love, you can't do that. So now I would like no a scoundrel, 100%. Like
Yeah.
I'd be traveling the universe with my furry companion, just loving life and just doing what I want to do, and being a scoundrel.
All right. I like it. An honest answer. Yeah, I feel like we I Jedi, yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. It's an aspirational thing. It's kind of like being a monk. It's like, yeah, who would want to live that way? I don't know. Number 5, the fifth and final of the 5 Star Wars questions is called impression or possession. This is where I ask my guests to either do a Star Wars impression or he's already got it ready to go. Opt out of the impression and simply tell me about a favorite Star Wars possession you may own. Curt, you texted me half a dozen or more pictures of your Star Wars collection, and I asked you to please narrow it down. What did you
I
come up
did,
with?
and I did. I narrowed it down. I narrowed
Okay.
it down to this.
Okay. Star Wars. It's a photo of George Lucas and Gary Kurtz. Is that on the right? Oh,
Yeah.
Presented by, wait, what did that say? Memorial Hospital Foundation.
Premiere by. So
Premiered by. Oh, okay.
this is the first ever Star Wars poster that has ever been made.
Okay.
So this Star Wars poster was it was from they did in July 1st, 1977. They did a screening of Star Wars for Memorial Hospital Foundation for the kids in the hospital. And it is the hardest thing to come across. And I was lucky enough to come across one just by random happenstance at an estate sale once. And the person that I bought this from also had a stack of 8x10 Lucasfilm archive photographs that I've still never seen, most of them online.
Yeah.
And so this poster, it seems like nothing, but it's my most prized possession because anybody that walks into my Star Wars room, if they don't go like, oh my God, or I know what that is, or what is that, they overlook it to look at like, oh, you've got an Ewoks action figure still in the package, that kind of stuff.
Now, see, I eat, sleep, and breathe Star Wars, and I wasn't familiar with this. So it must be, again, an OG generation thing. But you said this was on July 1st, and the movie came out at the end of May. So how was this the first screening?
So the reason I say it was the first screening, it was the first screening that they didn't do it at a theater. They did it for for the as you can see. So, or actually, no, I think it might have been, maybe it wasn't July 1st then. Now that you say that, I think this was the first one because they didn't even have like the proper poster. That's why they did this shot of them in front of the camera with like Chewbacca. So I think now that you're saying that, I think I got the date wrong. I think this was the prior to the premiere. Yeah, now you got me questioning that. But it was like, anyhow, like when I found it and I took a photo and I sent it to Steven Sansweet, he was like, "Oh, I need that." And I was like, "Nope." Nope. And then for a hot minute, I was like, I got to sell some stuff. I got to make rent or whatever. And I threw it up on eBay for a hot minute. And then I immediately regretted it. And I took it down. And since that day, there's all these fakes of my poster with the same photos. If you go to Amazon and look up this poster, there's a guy that says he found a stack of them and he's using my photos and selling fakes. And Steven Sansweet said, "Please tell me that that's not you." And I'm like, "Nope. That is not me."
Oh, wow.
And it's so hard to find that, like I said, this was like the first poster. So it's just a little 8x10. It means nothing really, but it makes me so happy.
I was not familiar with this at all. I really want to read more about it. But yeah, thank you for bringing that to my attention. This had somehow completely. I got to look up. I wonder if this is in my friend Richard Woloski wrote this book today in Star Wars history, and I
Oh,
wonder
cool.
if he's got that event somewhere, whichever date it did happen to
Yeah,
fall
yeah.
on. But yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for cluing me in about that. That's going to bring us to the end of the 5 Star Wars questions and to our final segment here on Who's the Boss. It's called First Steps into a Larger World. This is where we talk about the media that we're consuming and or enjoying outside of Star Wars. My example this week is a movie called Haunted Mansion from Walt Disney Studios. It's based on the attraction, the famous theme park attraction of the same name. There was a different movie called The Haunted Mansion 20 years ago with Eddie Murphy that I didn't love. I also did not love this one. Unfortunately, they haven't quite gotten it right yet. I like the Muppets one the most
Oh,
out of
yeah.
those. I think that one nailed it closer than any of these other movies have. So I can't recommend Haunted Mansion, the new one. Is that something you have seen or plan on seeing, Curt?
No, nope. I got
Okay.
burnt. I went to El Capitan to see the Haunted Mansion forever ago, and I
Yeah.
got all the photos with all the cool props and the sets and pieces. And so I thought about going to El Capitan just to get a photo in the Dune buggy. I just don't have the time. Like, there's so many movies I want to see that this just doesn't register.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer. There's got to be a way to make a Haunted Mansion movie that works, but this isn't it in my book. What about you, Kurt? Anything you've been watching, reading, playing, enjoying lately that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. I
Okay, yeah, I watched
love
that
it.
too. I'm like
Yeah.
3 episodes behind, but don't spoil it for me. And
Nope.
what do you like about it?
I really think they got it right. I think they got the formula right. They go just enough campy to
Yeah.
be like the '60s show, and then just enough serious to be like, whoa, they're going real serious, and they're having fun with it. And that's what I like. I like when a show can have fun with it.
I do know that there was an episode. Now, this is going to be a spoiler for people out there who don't know about this, but it's out there. They talked about it at Comic Con, I think, and there was a trailer. They crossed over with Lower Decks, right? So,
Correct. Yeah.
are you a fan of Lower Decks?
Love it. Absolutely love it.
Uh,
Connie Newsom, Paul F. Tompkins. I absolutely love them. So yeah, I'm a big fan of that.
and how did you feel this episode came across? Did you like the crossover?
I won't spoil anything. Don't worry. All I will say is they got it right. I loved it.
Awesome. I've seen 1 episode of Lower Decks. I've seen the first one, so I got to watch all that, and I'm going to watch this Strange New Worlds episode. But first, I'm going on a cruise. This is the last thing I have to say. There's not going to be an episode next week because I'm going to be on vacation, so don't look for that. But I'll be back in like mid-August with more Who's the Bossk. That's going to wrap up this episode, and I really want to thank my guest, Curt Sandvig. Curt, you got your fingers in a lot of pies, as they say.
Yeah,
Where do you want to send people to find you? I imagine it's going to be your podcast,
it
right? So
is.
where
Yeah.
can people go to find Paranormal Almanac?
Anywhere you find podcasts, Paranormal Almanac. Yeah, that's what I would say. If you want to get an idea of what I'm like, it is an unhinged conversation, unedited conversation, with explicit conversations about everything that's going on in paranormal. Paranormal Almanac, anywhere you can find me.
Sweet, check it out. Let's get the last few comments here. Tony Betty, my
Yeah,
coworker. Maybe if they got Guillermo del Toro back, we get the Haunted Mansion movie will be. Sorry, my brain has turned off. The Haunted Mansion movie we've been wanting. Yeah, that would be nice. That would have been the ideal way to go. Gotta admire Guillermo. He was working on it for a while. As they say, it fell into developmental hell, and then we got this version. But maybe someday. And Tony also said this about 30 Rock, which we were talking about earlier. Gerhard Habsburg must finally have won the love of a beautiful lady. Again, I
aw,
saw the episode once. I don't
aw.
remember it, but I gotta go back and revisit. Alexander Lee wanted to know how old I guess Paul Reubens was when he passed away. He was 70
Yep.
years old. So he had a nice, decent life, and obviously made a lot of people very happy. So that is what this episode was all about, paying tribute to Paul Reubens. And I'm not a religious person, but I will say rest in peace, and we will miss you very, very much. I'm sure, Curt, you can
Yes. Yeah.
agree with that. Thank you, everybody out there who is listening. You can find me on Instagram. I've been doing a lot of Instagramming lately. I joined very recently, and there's just been so much going on. Midsummer Scream was this past weekend. You can find a lot of pics from that over at Who's the Bossk Pod is my Instagram handle, and you're on Instagram as well. Is that
Paranormal Almanac, or you can do the
no?
private one of Holly Wookie. Both are fine.
Oh, Holly Wookie. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't want to step on your toes there, but okay. Visit laughingplace.com. You can see my pre-vacation mind has already switched over, but please go and visit laughingplace.com while I'm gone, and I will see you again very soon. Thanks again. My name is Mike Celestino, and I appreciate everyone, including you, Curt, and including everyone out there listening. Bye.